The moment I stepped into the ballroom, I heard her say it. Vanessa Hale, my brother's perfect fiancée, leaned toward her bridesmaids with a champagne flute balanced effortlessly in her hand. Her voice was low, but not low enough. She wanted it to travel. "Oh great," she whispered, smiling without warmth. The awkward sister finally showed up. Her friends laughed softly, the kind of laughter polished by privilege and expensive dresses. Vanessa did not even look at me. I was not worth eye contact. I was just an inconvenience. A reminder that perfection had cracks. I stood there for a second, letting the words settle, letting the old, familiar feeling try to crawl back in. The feeling of being small, out of place, unwanted. What Vanessa did not know, what no one in that room knew, was that I had signed a deed to this hotel 3 years ago. Every crystal chandelier above her head, every glass she drank from, every inch of marble beneath her heels, all of it belonged to me. My name is Marissa Cole. I am 32 years old, and I grew up learning how to disappear in my own family. This was my brother Ryan's engagement party, a room full of smiles, champagne, and quiet judgments. My mother Helen stood across the room, glowing with pride for her son, already calling Vanessa her future daughter-in-law. I wore simple clothes, nothing flashy, nothing that announced success. Real power never needs to introduce itself. Vanessa finally glanced in my direction, her smile sharp and dismissive. In her eyes I was still nobody, still the sister who never measured up, still the girl she could insult without consequence. I smiled back. Because by the end of the night she was going to learn a lesson she would never forget. Never underestimate the woman who owns the ground you are standing on. I did not become invisible overnight. That skill was taught to me slowly, carefully, by the people who were supposed to see me the most. I grew up in a quiet town where everyone knew everyone else's business, especially ours. The Cole family was respectable, comfortable, not rich but proud of how we looked from the outside. My older brother Ryan was the center of that picture. Ryan was the kind of boy teachers praised and neighbors admired. He was charming without trying, confident without effort. From the time we were kids, it was clear he was the one my mother believed in. Helen Cole never said she favored him. She did not have to. Favoritism lives in tone, in expectations, in who gets corrected and who gets excused. If Ryan brought home a good grade, it was proof of his potential. If I did the same, it was expected. If he failed, it was bad luck. If I failed, it was disappointment. At family gatherings, relatives asked Ryan about his plans, his future, his goals. When they turned to me, it was usually to ask if I was still undecided, still figuring things out, still behind. My mother had a way of looking at me that made me feel unfinished, like a draft that never quite became the final version. Ryan was the result she proudly displayed. I was the attempt she quietly set aside. I learned early not to argue, not to compete, not to ask for more space than I was given. I became easy, low maintenance, the daughter who did not cause trouble. But being overlooked does something to you. It teaches you to observe instead of speak, to plan instead of complain, to build your life quietly so no one can interfere with it. By the time I turned 18, I understood one thing with complete clarity. There was no room for me in that house unless I stayed small. So I left. I left home 2 weeks after my 18th birthday. No dramatic goodbye, no tears at the door. I packed one suitcase, took the money I had saved from part-time jobs, and got on a bus heading toward a city where no one knew my name or my place in the family hierarchy. I told myself that if I was going to fail, I would fail on my own terms. The first year was brutal. I rented a room I could barely afford and shared a kitchen with strangers who never learned my name. I worked long hours and slept short nights. There were weeks when dinner was whatever I could make stretch the longest. But I was free. My first real job was as a housekeeping assistant at a small boutique hotel. It was not glamorous. I cleaned rooms after checkout. I changed sheets. I scrubbed bathrooms until my hands were raw. Most people treated me like part of the furniture, something useful but easily ignored. I did not mind. While I cleaned, I listened. I watched how guests spoke to staff when they thought no one important was listening. I paid attention to how managers solved problems and how they caused them. I noticed which employees were trusted and which ones were tolerated. I learned how a hotel actually worked, not from a textbook, but from the inside out. When someone called in sick, I stayed late. When a supervisor needed help, I stepped in. I asked questions, then remembered the answers. Slowly, people started relying on me. After a year, I was moved to the front desk. After another, I was assisting with scheduling and inventory. I learned how numbers told stories if you knew how to read them. I did not post about my life. I did not call home to update anyone. Back in my hometown, they probably imagined me struggling, stuck, barely surviving. They were not entirely wrong at first, but they never saw what I was building in the quiet. While they were living their lives without me, I was learning how to build one that no one could take away. Progress did not come in dramatic leaps, it came in quiet steps that added up over time. By my mid-20s, I was managing operations at the same hotel where I once scrubbed floors. I knew every role because I had done most of them myself. That gave me an advantage no title ever could. I saved aggressively. I lived below my means even when my paycheck grew. I learned how to read contracts the same way I read people, carefully and without assumptions. When the opportunity came to invest in a struggling property, I took it, not recklessly, thoughtfully. I ran the numbers again and again until they made sense. That first investment was small, but it worked. One property became two became three. Each one taught me something new about timing, risk, and restraint. I made mistakes, but I made them quietly and fixed them the same way. By the time I turned 30, I had formed my own company, Cole Hospitality Group. We focused on boutique hotels with character, places people remembered not because they were flashy but because they felt intentional. The hotel hosting my brother's engagement party was my flagship, the one I was most proud of. And still, I never told my family. They never asked. To them, I was the daughter who left, the sister who drifted away, the one whose life was probably ordinary and a little disappointing. I let them believe that. Not out of revenge, not even out of spite. I had simply learned that people who never made space for you rarely know what to do when you succeed. Staying quiet protected what I built. It let me grow without opinions, without pressure, without expectations that never belonged to me. Success, I learned, is safest when it moves without announcing itself. And that silence was about to become very useful. The invitation to Ryan's engagement party arrived late. No heartfelt note, no apology for the years of distance, just a formal card with elegant lettering and the name of my hotel printed across the top. I hesitated before accepting. Part of me wanted to stay away, to let that chapter remain closed. But curiosity has a quiet pull, and something told me this night would matter. The party was exactly what Vanessa would have planned, expensive without being tasteful, designed to impress people who cared deeply about appearances. There were champagne towers, elaborate floral displays, and a guest list filled with people who spoke loudly about success and softly about substance. Vanessa moved through the room like she owned it, perfect posture, perfect smile. Her parents, Richard and Elaine Hale, stayed close, soaking in the attention like it was oxygen. From a distance they looked wealthy, confident, secure. Up close, something felt off. Richard checked his phone constantly, his jaw tightening each time he read a message. Elaine smiled too much, her hands fidgeting with her jewelry, as if she needed to remind herself it was real. They were watching the room, not enjoying it. Ryan stood beside Vanessa, proud and distracted, convinced he had made the right choice. He had that look people get when they think their life is finally falling into place. My mother, Helen, was in her element, introducing Vanessa as family already, laughing too loudly, glowing with the satisfaction of having done things the right way, at least in her mind. No one noticed me standing near the entrance, taking it all in. I was a guest, a footnote, the awkward sister who showed up out of obligation. And that was fine. Because the longer I watched the Hale family, the more certain I became of one thing. They were not here for love. They were here for something else. I noticed it first in the hallway outside the restrooms. Richard Hale stood with his back against the wall, phone pressed to his ear, his voice low and urgent. He did not see me. He was too busy convincing someone on the other end of the line that everything was under control. He said they just needed to get through the wedding. That once the families were officially connected, things would settle. He mentioned money, coverage, and time, each word clipped with stress. When he hung up and walked away, his confident smile slid back into place like a mask, but the tension never fully left his shoulders. that conversation stayed with me. I started paying closer attention. Richard's constant phone checks, Elaine's nervous habit of touching her necklace, Vanessa's eyes, sharp and hungry, scanning the room as if she were measuring what belonged to her already. Then it clicked. The Hale family believed the Cole family had money, real money, hidden money. But there was no family fortune. My parents lived comfortably, but only because their expenses had quietly been covered for years. Mortgage payments, medical bills, repairs they could not afford. They did not know it was me. They never asked. And my mother, proud and careless with assumptions, had likely filled in the blanks herself. In her mind, Ryan was the one supporting them, the successful son taking care of his parents in secret. And she talked. She talked to her friends, to acquaintances, to anyone who would listen. She talked about how well her son was doing, how secure their future was, how some families did not need to show their wealth to have it. The Hales listened, and they believed they had found their solution. I stepped aside and made a quiet call to the hotel's general manager, someone I trusted completely. I asked him to look into the Hale family, business records, past ventures, anything that might explain their urgency. He did not ask questions, he never did. An hour later he handed me a folder. Inside were court filings, financial reports, and news articles I had somehow missed. The picture they formed was not subtle. The Hale family was drowning. Multiple failed developments, investors demanding answers, a federal investigation moving closer every month. This engagement was not a celebration. It was an escape plan. And suddenly, everything made sense. Vanessa found me near the back corridor, just outside the noise of the ballroom. She approached with a smile that looked friendly from a distance and felt sharp up close. Her hand landed on my arm as if we were close, as if we had ever been. She suggested we talk, just the two of us. The moment we were out of earshot, the smile disappeared. She told me she knew about me, about how I sent money home every month, about how I played the dutiful daughter from a distance while pretending I did not care what my family thought. What confused her, she said, was why someone like me would bother. Someone who could barely afford a decent apartment, someone who was always a step behind, someone who never quite mattered. She tilted her head and studied me like a problem she thought she had already solved. Then she said maybe I was trying to buy their love, trying to prove I was worth something. Her voice stayed calm, but her words were designed to cut. She told me Ryan had explained everything, how I was always jealous, how I could not stand being second, how the family only kept me around out of obligation. Then she leaned closer and said something I will never forget. She said once she married Ryan, it would be better if I stayed away, that no one would miss me, that I was dead weight. I let her finish. I did not argue. I did not defend myself. I did not correct a single assumption she made. Because Vanessa believed she understood the situation, she believed she was standing above me looking down. What she did not realize was that she was bragging about a rented life to the woman who owned the building. I watched her walk back into the ballroom, confident and satisfied, convinced she had put me in my place. And I stood there calmly, knowing she had just made the biggest mistake of her life. People who underestimate you never see you coming. And Vanessa had no idea how close the truth was to the surface. The music softened as Richard Hale stepped onto the small stage near the center of the ballroom. He adjusted his tie, lifted his glass, and smiled at the crowd with the ease of a man who had practiced this moment many times. Conversations faded. Guests turned their attention forward, ready for the toast. He thanked everyone for coming. He spoke about family, about new beginnings, about how honored the Hales were to be joining the Cole family. He mentioned trust, legacy, and building a future together. Every word landed like a lie wrapped in silk. Vanessa stood beside Ryan, her hand looped through his arm, her face glowing with confidence. My mother watched from the front row, beaming with pride. I caught the eye of the hotel's general manager across the room and gave a single, subtle nod. The screens behind the stage flickered. At first, guests thought it was a technical glitch. The engagement photos vanished, replaced by a legal document stamped with court seals and dates. Richard froze. A murmur rippled through the room as people leaned closer, trying to read what was on the screen. Another document appeared. Then another. Financial records. Company names. Transactions that told a story no one had been invited to hear. News headlines followed: failed developments, investor complaints, ongoing federal investigations. Then the photos appeared. Vanessa, 3 years younger, standing beside the same two people now calling themselves her parents. Different names, same faces, same eyes. The room fell silent. Vanessa's champagne glass slipped from her hand and shattered against the floor. Ryan looked from the screens to her face, searching for an explanation that never came. Richard tried to laugh it off. He called it a misunderstanding, a mistake. He demanded someone shut it down. But the screens kept changing. The truth does not stop once it starts speaking. That was when I stepped forward. The general manager's voice carried through the room, calm and clear. He introduced me as the owner of the hotel and the head of Cole Hospitality Group. Gasp echoed around the ballroom. My mother's smile disappeared. Ryan stared at me as if he were seeing me for the first time. I took the microphone from Richard's shaking hand and told the guests exactly who they were celebrating. I explained the investigation, the false identities, and the reason this engagement mattered so much to the Hale family. Vanessa screamed that I was lying, that I was jealous, that I was trying to ruin her happiness. I looked at her and calmly mentioned the federal agents waiting outside. Right on cue, the ballroom doors opened. Badges flashed, the music stopped, and the lies finally ran out of room to hide. The room stayed frozen as the agents moved in. Richard Hale tried to speak, then tried to step back, then tried to run. He did not make it far. Elaine collapsed into tears, clutching her purse as if it could protect her from what was happening. Vanessa stood perfectly still, her face drained of color, her perfect evening collapsing in real time. Handcuffs clicked, voices murmured. Phones came out. The engagement party was over. Ryan looked like someone waking up inside a nightmare. He kept shaking his head, as if the screens might suddenly change back and make everything normal again. When he finally looked at me, his eyes were glassy and lost. He asked how long I had known. I told him the truth. Not long, long enough. He said he was sorry. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just quietly, like someone who finally understood the damage done by years of not paying attention. My mother stood a few steps away, smaller than I had ever seen her. Gone was the confidence, the pride, the certainty. She watched the Hales being escorted out and then looked at me with something close to fear. Later, when the crowd thinned, I showed her the truth she had never asked for: the transfers, the payments, years of quiet support she had credited to someone else. Her voice broke when she realized it had been me all along. No one clapped, no one celebrated. There was no victory speech, no satisfaction in watching people fall. Just a strange, heavy quiet. Because revenge is never as loud as people expect. Sometimes it sounds like the truth finally being heard. A few weeks later, the hotel was quiet again. The investigation moved forward without me. Headlines came and went. The Hale family's names disappeared from polite conversation as quickly as they had entered it. Life settled. Ryan came to see me one afternoon. Not as my older brother who had always assumed he knew better, but as a man trying to understand who his sister actually was. We talked without defensiveness, without competition. It was not perfect, but it was honest. That was enough for now. My mother called a few days later. Her voice was softer than I remembered. She did not ask for forgiveness. She said she wanted to understand, that she had started looking at herself in ways she never had before. We agreed to take things slowly. Rebuilding takes time. That morning I hosted a small business meeting in the hotel restaurant. Investors, partners, familiar faces. A young woman walked in looking unsure, clearly out of place. Someone at the table made a careless comment about whether she belonged there. I stood up and welcomed her by name. I introduced her as the newest recipient of our hospitality scholarship. I watched her shoulders relax as she realized she was exactly where she was meant to be. After the meeting, I stood in the lobby and watched guests pass through the doors of a building I once cleaned from top to bottom. People will always try to make you feel small because of where you came from. Let them. While they are busy looking down on you, they will not see you building the ground beneath their feet. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to like, share, and leave a comment. Tell me where you are watching from. And remember, the quiet kind of revenge lasts the longest.